Good morning on this Friday, February 12th, 2021. Let it be known, mental health has always been stigmatized, especially in the Black community. Well, today we're going to talk about the impacts of the lack of mental health providers of color. We're going to talk about that with Dr. Burnett-Zeigle a little bit later. But first, the news updates, and we have several for you this morning. When lead House impeachment manager Jamie Raskin introduced Stacey Plaskett at the Senate trial of former President Donald Trump, he highlighted the historic role she is playing as part of the prosecution. He said, "This is a moment of special pride for me," noting that Stacey Plaskett is the first delegate ever to be on a team of impeachment managers in American history. The delegate Plaskett, who has been in the spotlight during the impeachment trial as one of the House managers outlining the case against the former president, is in her fourth term representing the U.S. Virgin Islands at-large congressional district. Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi introduced legislation on Thursday to grant the Congressional Gold Medal to U.S. Capitol police officers and law enforcement personnel who protected the Capitol during the violent insurrection on January 6th. That is the highest honor that Congress can bestow. She said the outstanding heroism and patriotism of our heroes deserve and demand our deepest appreciation. She also singled out Officer Eugene Goodman. We saw a new video during the impeachment trial yesterday in which it showed Eugene Goodman at his best, protecting Senator Mitt Romney. In fact, the new video that was not seen before showed that Mitt Romney was this close to being attacked by the insurrectionists. And you know that the former president has been at odds with the senator from Utah. She went on to say, Nancy Pelosi, the sacrifice of our heroes who sustained injuries and the courage of Officer Eugene Goodman exemplify the patriotism and the commitment of Capitol Police officers and those of other law enforcement agencies to risk their lives in service of our country. So Nancy Pelosi honored those heroes at the U.S. Capitol. Also, a new study published on Thursday in the Journal of Science suggests that diversity in law enforcement can indeed lead to improvements in how police treat people of color. It is a system that very clearly needs reform, said University of Pennsylvania data scientist Dean Knox, who actually co-authored that study. He says, "We just haven't had good data on what reforms work." For the paper, Mr. Knox and his colleagues analyzed data on nearly 3 million Chicago Police Department patrol assignments. They found that compared to white officers, Black and Hispanic officers made far fewer stops and arrests and used force less often, especially against Black civilians. They also found female officers used less force than their male counterparts. The researchers spent 3 years fighting for detailed data from Chicago police and appealed some of their requests all the way up to the Illinois Attorney General's office. So police reform remains a major topic, and data continues to show why. And also, when we think about police reform, the mental health aspect of it. Many say that officers are responding to calls that they shouldn't. Perhaps they shouldn't. Perhaps a mental health expert should respond to those calls. Well, we're going to talk more about mental health. Dr. Burnett-Zeigle has addressed the unrecognized, untreated mental health challenges in the Black community, including stress, irritability, anger, and even weight gain. She also impacts the lack of actual mental health providers of color and providers in general. There's a lack of culturally competent providers with no distinction of color. Let's talk now with Dr. Burnett-Zeigle. Good morning, doctor.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thanks for being here. We really appreciate it. So there's a lot there, Dr. Zeigle. First of all, I want to talk about that, the lack of actual mental health providers of color. We talk a lot about in education, the lack of teachers of color. But here we have the mental health field. Talk about the lack of mental health providers of color.
Yeah, it's a big problem, particularly when we're thinking about trying to get folks in the African American community to participate in mental health treatment. And one of their most significant concerns is being able to see a provider of color. One of our main organizations, the American Psychological Association, APA, has put out some data that says that less than 5% of psychologists nationwide are Black. So when you think about the impact of that, when folks are saying, I want to see a Black provider, there really just aren't enough available.
Wow. And, obviously in the Black community, especially, but throughout the mental health community, but there's been this stigma. And certainly we hear a lot about in our community that the reluctance to discuss that. Is that changing at all?
I do think it's changing. I think it's changing with the younger generation. I think celebrities speaking out about mental health challenges that they've experienced, whether it's postpartum depression, Charlemagne talking about anxiety, even Kanye talking about some of his struggles with bipolar disorder, are really opening up a space where people are more comfortable talking about some of the challenges that they experience, but taking that a step further, I think it's important that we not only talk about the challenges, but also talk about taking those next steps to get help and seek treatment.
Yeah. And I want to say good morning to Alma Martin Gill. Ask Alma. You got to check her show out on, I believe it's Tuesdays, but Alma, write it and correct me. Give me the time and date. But Ask Alma is a fantastic show that the Black Press puts on each week. You got to tune in. It's very interactive. Good morning, Alma. So, Doctor, you mentioned several people, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on just one person, but going back to Kanye West, and he's now reportedly split up with his wife. When a person has episodes, talk about how that affects the family.
Yeah, it can be a significant strain on the family when someone is going through whatever episode. They may be having a period of significant anxiety. They may be having a period of significant, what we call mania, where they're impulsive, they're acting out, they're irritable, they're kind of unable to carry out day to day activities. They may be having a significant period of depression, and that can really resonate through the family in a lot of different ways. The family members may be in a space where they have to care for that person. They may be receiving some negative emotion from that person. That person might be lashing out at them. They may be challenged with the responsibility of trying to help that person get into treatment. And so it can really be a challenge, not only for the person going through it, but the others that come into close contact with them.
Wow, yeah, and just so everybody know, I mentioned Ask Alma. It's Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern time, so check her out. Dr. Ziegler, can you tell us more about why you decided to pursue a career in clinical psychology?
Yeah, quite honestly, I don't have an exciting story other than, freshman year in college, I just really fell in love with my psychology courses. I was fascinated by people, fascinated by the way the mind works and the way that, folks' individual life experiences can really affect the way they think and the way that they feel. And, as I moved along and had opportunities to spend time in psychiatric hospitals and other places where folks who are challenged with their mental health are, like a sheltered workshop was an early experience that I had. I really just felt drawn to the work, understanding folks' lives, and particularly those that are really suffering, trying to give them the tools to live lives that are more well and without as much suffering.
Yeah, our Bobby Henry, one of our own, he's the publisher of the West Side Gazette in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, says we all need a mental health checkup. Can you speak to that, though? Is that actually so that we all need a mental health checkup?
Yeah, so when I hear that, I hear it in a couple of different ways. When you go to your primary care provider annually, they actually are supposed to be asking a couple of questions about your mental health, about depression specifically. There's a standard screening tool that PCPs are required to ask of individuals at each annual visit, and says things like, have you felt significantly down or depressed? Have you lost pleasure in activities that you used to enjoy? Do you find it difficult to carry out your day-to-day activities? And that's one of the things I consider to be a mental health checkup that's embedded in the healthcare system. And then if you're positive on that, your PCP is then supposed to refer you to get additional help, whether it be counseling or a medication evaluation. But the other way that I hear that, I'm a big believer in mindfulness, and mindfulness is really just a fancy word for how we pay attention to what's going on. And that version of mental health checkup, I think, is so important. Just taking time throughout each day. I think this is a daily practice to check in with ourselves and see how we're feeling, see if we're feeling stressed, see how that stress might be showing up in the body, see how the stress might be kind of manifesting in our minds. And that tool of paying attention can help us take care of ourselves in a better way.
Yeah, and Dr. Ziegler, again, we're talking with Dr. Inger Burnett-Ziegler. Dr. Ziegler, we know that the pandemic has only made things for many more anxious. Can you talk about people during the pandemic? How do you cope? How do you talk to people about coping? Because when things look like they're getting better, then it turns around and it adds to the stress. How do you cope? What is your advice on coping during the pandemic?
I think one of the biggest things that's made the pandemic challenging for people and has contributed to their anxiety is the lack of certainty. Folks want to be able to plan for when their kids are going to return to school, plan for the summer, know when they're going to be able to take vacations, know when they're going to return to work if they're working from home. And that lack of uncertainty can lead to a lot of fear and worry. So one of the biggest things that I tell people is to stay present, to do what you can with the information that you have available to you right now, and to kind of let go of this future worry. And that can be really tough because we want to know what's coming next.
Mm-hmm.
And right now that is just not possible.
Yeah.
Some other things that I really recommend are keeping your day-to-day routine. I know at least earlier on in the pandemic, a lot of folks were, maybe lounging around in their pajamas for most of the day, or not getting outside as much as they typically would, or dropping out of an exercise routine. And keeping that schedule that you would outside of the pandemic can also be really important in terms of maintaining your mental health.
Yeah, and Doctor, this is a question I thought about. Social media. How much of a role has social media played as far as mental health, perhaps eroding some's mental health?
Sure. There's some research out that studies exactly that. Social media, of course, has its benefits and its potential harms. The benefits, as we know, are being able to connect with friends and family worldwide. But what can happen is on social media, a couple of things. One is that on social media, we're presenting our best selves, right? And so that's just a little slice of our lives. And so other folks can see that and find themselves comparing themselves to the best self of someone else, in turn putting themselves down. I see that come up a lot in therapy, this idea of social comparison, where everybody else seems like they are leading a happier, more exciting life than they are. The other role that social media can play in terms of mental health is particularly when the world is in crisis, when there's constant news about the election, constant news about civil unrest, constant news about COVID. We can find ourselves kind of constantly checking. So doom scrolling, if you will, just checking constantly. And that checking of the phone of that negative information or triggering information, I should say, can also contribute to anxiety.
Wow, doom scrolling. That's a phrase I don't think I've heard before. I like that phrase. Alma is asking, ask Alma. Alma is asking, how do we help family members who live alone, especially seniors? Great question.
Yeah, staying connected. I think this is really a time to do some old-fashioned reaching out. I know a lot of seniors are not as savvy with the technology, so connecting by Zoom or through the various apps may not be as accessible to them. And so just making sure that we're checking in on our seniors, maybe even doing drive-bys or delivering food or those types of things to let them know that they're still cared for, to let them still have that sense of connection to loved ones, I think is really the most important way that we can show up for our seniors right now.
Great. And doctor, is there anything that's currently trending in the market that's impacting the mental wellness of people of color?
I think life overall is stressful for a lot of people, but particularly the impact of COVID has been disproportionately stressful for people of color. We know that more people of color have not only contracted but died from COVID. We know people of color are more likely to be in those frontline positions where the risk of contracting COVID is higher. They're also more impacted by financial concerns, unemployment concerns, housing instability. Here in Chicago, of course, gun violence is a great topic of concern. And so all of these social factors that are going on in the world that are kind of heightened now, but even existed prior to COVID, have great potential for impacting mental health.
Yeah, I want to say good morning to James Wright of the Washington Informer who's watching, and Lynn Spivey as well. Doctor, what are the key benefits that Black men and women can gain from seeking good quality health from a therapist?
Yeah, we carry so much. And I think, especially in the Black community, we've kind of been taught that we just, buckle down, grind, and push through. And that makes us resilient. That gives us the tools to be able to just make it every day, but it also can be a really heavy weight that we carry. And so when we go to therapy, we have the opportunity to kind of shed some of that weight, to be in a safe space where we can be heard, where we can be understood. And even beyond that, the therapist can give folks tools to be able to help their mental health. So, one of the things that I do in therapy is reflect back to people some of their thoughts that, if they're putting themselves down, if they're being too harsh on themselves, being too critical, focusing on the past, worrying too much about the future, pointing that out to them and giving them the tools in the moment to change the way they think, to change their behavior so that they can live happier and healthier lives.
Yeah, and is there a checklist of things people of color should look for when vetting a therapist for help?
Oh, that's a hard question. It's always interesting to me when I get a new person in therapy that comes in kind of with their checklist and wanting to interview me. Are you this? Are you that? It's, as I mentioned, there's only 5% of therapists nationwide that are Black. And so when we add additional criteria onto that, barring quality, it can really narrow the pool down even further. But some of the things that you might ask a therapist if you're struggling with trauma, for example, because we know that people in the African American community are disproportionately impacted by trauma. We might ask, is that an area of expertise for you? Another thing you might ask is, do you have a more structured therapy or more informal therapy? Structured therapy is that which there's a lot of pen and paper work, a lot of homework, and some people like that, some people don't. And the more informal is more supportive therapy. And sometimes folks prefer that. But outside of a checklist, a lot of it is just about fit. Is this somebody that you feel comfortable with? Is this somebody that you feel like you can share the most private parts of yourself with? And it's through that trust and through that safety that you can really do some good work in therapy.
Yeah, and Lynn Spivey is asking, is where can we find a list of Black mental health providers?
Yeah, so Psychology Today publishes a nationwide registry where you actually can go in and indicate your preferences. And one thing I like about Psychology Today is the preferences that you can select from are actually quite broad. So, type of therapy, male or female, race, ethnicity, location, of course, in the country. And so that's one of the largest registries nationwide that you can use to choose a therapist. Other options, of course, is going through your insurance panel if that's something that's available to you, and also asking for recommendations from your primary care physician, because often we go there first before we go to a therapist. And finally, if your employer offers an EAP, Employee Assistance Program, often therapy is included in that, and that may be another option for getting connected to a therapist.
Oh, great. So now earlier I asked you to tell us more about why you decided to pursue a career in clinical psychology. But as a woman of color, why do you feel you are able to uniquely address mental challenges faced in the Black community?
There's studying the material. My area of expertise is around, mental health in the African American community. I've studied many years for that. I read the papers, I have the clinical training, et cetera. But I also have the lived experience. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I am a Black woman myself. I have family members and friends that are Black people. And so, I feel like my knowledge comes from a place of that lived experience, a place of relatedness, where I'm able to embed that with the book knowledge that I've gained. With that, I try to never assume to know more than I do. I think people are the masters of their own lives, and each person that I come in touch with, um, they have something to teach me about their experience. And I'm there to listen, I'm there to understand, and I'm there to hopefully provide them with some resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Bobby Henry is asking, is there a relationship between the National Black Psychologist or psychiatrist with our police departments? Do you know of a relationship there?
No, that's a great question. That's a really great question. And I heard in your opener, you were talking about this idea around should police be the ones to respond to mental health crises. And I know that's a topic of great concern in Chicago, but I have not heard of a partnership with the Association of Black Psychologists. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and our producer mentions that the therapy for Black girls, clinicians for people of color, both offer Black therapists.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about them?
Therapy for Black girls in particular is a resource that I think is awesome, initiated by Dr. Joy, who I think is wonderful. She's out of Atlanta. And not only does it provide resources, but it is an app where really important conversations are happening and offering a really great safe space for people to be talking about the mental health challenges that they're experiencing. I think that's a great one.
Oh, fantastic. And one of my favorite people in the family of National Newspaper Publishers Association, Jackie Hampton at the Mississippi Link. She's the publisher down there. She says, how do you convince someone to see a therapist when they believe they are okay?
I get that question a lot. And, the short answer is you can't. I think that sometimes out of concern, we want to force people to do things that they just may not be ready to do at the time. And so the approach that I really suggest is constantly checking in on our loved ones and offering them the option of therapy rather than forcing. or trying to force or demanding. Often people really just don't respond to being pressured or boxed into doing anything, let alone therapy. And so it's just that gentle offering that can be more effective, even if it has to be done repeatedly. So that sounds like, have you considered, talking to someone about this? I think that might be really helpful for you. I'll go with you, or I can help you find someone. And if they say no, then you back off. And then maybe it's a couple of weeks or months later and say, I notice you're still really having a hard time. Have you considered talking to someone, and kind of continuously going through that process? Now, there is a caveat. If we're talking about a situation where someone is expressing suicidal thoughts or an intention to harm themselves, then you can aid them in going to the emergency room, or calling the police for assistance. Now, of course, we know that we have a challenged relationship with the.
Slippery slope right there, Doc.
Yeah, it is. It is. And so I do say that with some pause. One thing that, I tell folks, if they find themselves kind of wanting to use that option, is to letting them know right up front that this is a mental health concern. And sometimes that can prime the responders. And if you're able to be there, that can be helpful as well. And then the suicide hotline, if that's the situation that you're working with.
And so patience, Dr. Ziegler, seems to be the order of the day for those, going back to Jackie Hampton's question, when you trying to convince someone to see a therapist, when they believe that they are okay. So on that person's side, the person that's trying to convince the person who's having the episode, patience appears to be what's in order.
It's patience and recognizing that we can't control other people. All we can do is continue to show up for them and continue to support them. One term that we use is just meeting people where they are. And so that person just may not be ready at that time. And we, as the loved one, have to be okay with that. And, still wrap them in support and love and compassion and all those things, and usher them along so that when they are ready, we can support them in that choice as well.
And Dr. Ziegler, any final thoughts you'd like to share with our viewers about mental health as they continue to honor Black History Month?
I appreciate this conversation. I think conversations like this are so important in terms of raising awareness around mental health challenges and erasing some of the stigma that can come with not only the mental health challenges themselves, but participation in treatment. And just to let folks know that we all suffer at some point. The degree to which might vary, but this is a universal human experience, and there's no shame in that. And getting help is the way that we can stay in control of our emotions and live well lives.
Dr. Inger Burnett-Zeigle, we certainly thank you for taking out the time this morning. It's been certainly an educational experience for all of us. So we thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our Black History Month remembrance is Daisy Bates. Daisy Bates was a civil rights activist best known for her work on behalf of the Little Rock Nine. Bates and her husband founded the Arkansas State Press, a weekly African-American newspaper that advocated for civil rights. In 1952, Bates became the president of the NAACP's Arkansas chapter, and in 1957, she fought for the Little Rock Nine, the 9 Black students who were attending an all-white school as part of the school's desegregation. Bates escorted and advocated for the students amid intense opposition and is honored by the state of Arkansas with a state holiday on the third Monday of February. Daisy Bates, remembering Daisy Bates on Black History Month. Let it be known, truth is powerful and it prevails. We will see you on Monday. Everybody have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay well, social distance, wear a mask, wash your hands. See you then.